Bastion is back, and the X-Men start killing. Welcome to Second Coming, ladies and gentlemen. The ending of this is gonna blow your mind. So, X-Men Second Coming initially opens with the return of Cable and Hope Summers. Now, all you guys know who Cable is, for the most part, even if only by X-Men the Animated Series. The long and short of Hope Summers is she was the first mutant born after the events of House of M when the Scarlet Witch took away 98% of the mutant population's powers. If you didn't know about that, and your mind is like, what? There's a video link at the end of this that'll link you to the events of House of M so you can get caught up on it all. The long and short of this is that everybody was trying to find Hope, and some people were trying to kill her. So Cable pops up, snatches her up, and then takes her into the future. What follows over the course of Messiah Complex and Messiah War, the other two parts of this three-part trilogy that come before Second Coming, is basically Bishop is chasing after Cable and Hope, trying to kill Hope for reasons that we don't need to go into here, and Cable and Hope are trying to avoid Bishop. That's really all it is. But when they arrive back here on the scene, everything has kind of gone nuts as far as the X-Men goes, but they are immediately attacked by the Smileys. Now, the Smileys are a really cool group. They've been around in Marvel Comics for a long time. They're led by a guy named Cameron Hodge. And Cameron Hodge, you probably remember from X-Men the Animated Series from the episode Slave Island, the blonde guy who was like the PR guy working alongside like Bolivar Trask and those guys. But Cameron Hodge is staunchly anti-mutant. His forces are the Smileys. As you're gonna see over the course of this video, there are a lot of people going after the X-Men and things get bloody fast. Because what happens is that in the midst of Cable and Hope returning, suddenly Cyclops is made aware of the fact that they're back. Now that's the other part of what was going on with Messiah Complex and Messiah War. That while Cable and Hope were trying to avoid Bishop, they were also trying to avoid X-Force. That X-Force was kind of like the Black Ops wet work team of the X-Men. They were basically authorized by Cyclops to do whatever it is they had to do to achieve their mission, up to and including killing whoever they had to. It was a very controversial move by Cyclops, but he kept the whole thing under wraps. He hid it from the rest of the X-Men. They never knew. They find out here, and things go sideways quick. And so because he's back, Cyclops pulls together a full contingent of the X-Men and X-Force, with the X-Men unaware of what X-Force has been doing. As far as the X-Men are aware, Wolverine's just there as a member of the team, doing his thing, and like that's effectively it. But they have secondary missions here. And so switching back to Cable and Hope, when the Smileys are attacking, one of the things to know is that even when Cable took Hope into the future, he taught her how to be a soldier. Now, one of the things that I want you to kind of toy with over the course of this video, especially in regards to X-Men 97, I want you to take the character of Cable and replace him with Bishop in this story. Then I want you to take the character of Hope Summers and replace her with Cable if he was a teenager right after he had been taken into the future by Bishop in X-Men 97. Just kind of imagine that. And it feels like that's what's going to be happening in X-Men 97. I don't know, just kind of a little theory that I'm throwing out there. But the Smileys are hardcore. And while Cable and Hope are very capable, at the end of the day, they're still dealing with technology that isn't necessarily supposed to exist. Because what happens is that when Cable takes these guys out, he tells Hope, something's wrong here. Right? The Smileys are limited by the technology of their time. No intention of referencing Howard Stark, but like they're limited here, right? They have like 20th, 21st century technology. The technology they're utilizing here has not been invented yet, right? Hence the whole idea that like they're working for a much grander force. So following that, what you end up getting are just kind of these pot-shot groups that are showing up here and there, but you have Cable who basically goes on the lam alongside Hope Summers. And in fact, when the X-Men team arrive here, they arrive after the fact, right? These Smileys have been destroyed and people have been killed and so on and so forth, but it's basically Cyclops telling all of them, I know Cable, right? One, because Cable's his son, but two, because they'd spent a lot of time together over the years in Marvel Comics. And he says, I know exactly what Cable's going to do. Cable is going to go low tech, right? He's going to try to get the lay of the land. He's not going to want to make a great big huge profile for himself. He's going to grab a vehicle and they're going to hit the road. They can just blend in with all the cars around them and nobody will be any to the wiser of the fact that they're out there. Wrong, because literally like the Sapien League, I'm pretty sure it's the Sapien League, they pop up out of nowhere. Now they're one of many anti-mutant groups who are out there, hence Sapien League, right? Like they're all about Homo sapiens. They go to make their attack, but the X-Men intervene. And of course the X-Men are able to stop a bunch of these guys, and that's when the killing starts. Because what goes on here is you have like Nightcrawler and Psylocke, the normal members of the X-Men, who are asking these guys questions, right? What's going on? Why are you guys doing what what you're doing. Why are you hunting Cable and Hope Summers? What's the deal? One of them just refuses to answer. And they even go so far as to say, like, I will kill myself before I talk. And in turn, X-23 plunges her claws right through the guy's head. At that point, the other guy starts spilling the beans, right? He just starts talking, babbling like a baby. Because up until this point, the idea was the X-Men don't kill. The X-Men never kill, right? That's just not their thing. They may taunt us or say they're going to, but like they never do. Watching X-23 kill this dude on the spot, it's like, wow, right? The tables have turned. The game is different now. Now, there's other reasons as to why this is the case and why the X-Men are so extreme, and I'll talk more about that as we get further into this. But Nightcrawler pops up on the scene here, right? Like teleports to X-23 and is like, what are you doing? Right? Like, we do not kill. That's not what we're supposed to do. But what ends up happening is X-Force unintentionally kind of lets loose, at least only by, body language, that they kind of know what's going on. And that's when you have like members of the X-Men who are just like, what's happening, right? Like even Nightcrawler is just like, what's going on here, right? Like, you know something that you're not telling us. And that's when you get this really cool moment where you switch to Washington, D.C., right? And we're told the Sapien League contingent has been compromised. All is ready. Report. Stephen Lang, Bolivar Trask. Their response, the Mutant Response Division has 500 units ready to move on your order. They have international access via the United Nations. Any and all mutants outside of Utopia are being tracked. We'll talk about what Utopia is here in a second. In response, Bastion says William Stryker, Graydon Creed, Cameron Hodge. Graydon Creed is the son of Sabretooth, by the way. I said he was the father of Sabretooth in the other story that we did about Bastion. My bad. Right? But in turn, they chime in and they say, we're folding the Sapien League into the Purifiers. We have 50 bases, each with 100 men armed and ready. In turn, Graydon Creed says the Friends of Humanity number in the thousands. And then of course we're told the right has 40 armored divisions at your command. What is your command, Bastion? And he in turn says, the Mutant Messiah is here. Killer. Now, a couple things that I want to explain here about what's going on. Number one, most of you guys are familiar with the X-Men living out there in Westchester, New York. They did up until Jonathan Hickman launched his whole X-Men run, which moved them to Krakoa. Prior to that, there was a whole branding initiative in Marvel Comics called Dark Reign. And the idea behind Dark Reign was more or less after Secret Invasion, Tony Stark was kicked out as director of S.H.I.E.L.D. He was replaced with Norman Osborn, the Green Goblin, and then he did what bad guys do. He tore apart S.H.I.E.L.D., replaced it by Hammer, and systematically just started taking over the United States, at least as far as outlawing superheroes, different things along those lines. The X-Men fled Westchester and then took off to an island off the coast of San Francisco. That island is Utopia. It puts them outside the control of Norman Osborn and basically his forces during the events of Dark Reign. And they had been there almost that entire time. But another thing that I want to talk about here that a lot of you guys may not know about, at least casual fans, is William Stryker and the Purifiers. These guys are nuts, right? They're believers. They are united through religious conviction. They believe it's their mission from God to kill mutants. So these guys, you can never convince them otherwise. You can never sway their minds. They are tried and true believers. In God Loves Man Kills, the story that originally introduced them, they killed a couple of adolescent mutants, couldn't have been any more than 7 or 8 years old, strung them up in a park and put the sign Mutie around their neck. That's how extreme these guys are, right? They are next level nuts. And so following that, and as you guys are going to notice, the art is changing. That's because Second Coming goes through a series of comic books, X-Force, Uncanny X-Men, X-Factor, and so on. You pick back up with like the X-Men and effectively X-Force at this point in time, by the time the X-Men realize that the X-Force are killing people. And what ends up happening is basically Wolverine and them say like, this is all sanctioned by Cyclops. Right, this is all sanctioned by him. Like, you're not supposed to know about it, you weren't supposed to know about it, but now you do. More so than that, Wolverine says, we knew this war had been coming for quite some time, and some of us have been trying to stop it, but it was only a matter of time before it happened. We could not see all ends. And that's when Cyclops chimes in, using the telepathy of Emma Frost, who's kind of channeling his mind into the minds of the other X-Men, and he tells them, yes, I sanctioned X-Force. I created X-Force as a Black Ops wet work team that they operate behind behind the scenes, they've been as far as into the future. You guys don't know about them, you weren't supposed to know about them, and yes, I sanctioned lethal action by X-Force. They can beg, borrow, kill, and steal, whatever they need to do to achieve their mission. And the X-Men are appalled by this. Right now, this is all kind of like the villain arc of Cyclops, as I like to call it. Not truly a villain, but effectively a villain. The reason why is actually covered in a video that we did titled Cyclops Was Marvel's Best Villain, and it basically explores the whole villain arc that he had that started all the way back with like House of M, and basically went all the way into essentially Jonathan Hickman's Avengers and New Avengers, the collapse of the multiverse, and Secret Wars 2015. It was a phenomenal time to be a fan of Cyclops, right? The mid-2000s running up to like 2015, the best decade to be an X-Men fan in Marvel Comics. I don't care what anybody says. And I've read pretty much everything you can read when it comes to the X-Men. And so following that, you pick back up with Bastion. And Bastion basically tells them, now is our time. Now here's the kicker, and this shows you how capable Bastion is, right? He says, this plan, our plan to slaughter this little mutant whelp is at long last in full swing. Tracking them through conventional methods has proven fruitless. Of course, Cable and Hope is who they're referring to. Whether that's a technology he possesses or an ability the girl is manifesting, we can determine later. For the time being, all of our mutant hunting methodologies are functionally useless, as are the X-Men. But we, unlike them, are not completely blind, because I've planned on absolutely everything. The techno-organic virus that allowed me to resurrect you all burns within Cable as well. We won't track the X-Men, we will not even track the girl, we won't even track Cable, but instead, we'll track the virus itself. X marks the spot. Basically, they're tracking Cable indirectly because Cable, as most of you guys know, is infected with a techno-organic virus. It is a virus that is constantly trying to eat away at his physical flesh and replace it with machinery. If that happens, Cable will die. That's the reason why you have characters like Strife, who's the clone of Cable, X-Man Nate Gray, who's a version of Cable from an alternate reality, who are both just astronomically powerful, but Cable is not, because he constantly has to use his telepathy and telekinesis to keep the virus from eating his body alive. And so tracking the techno-organic virus means you will always know where Cable is, because he can never be rid of it. He can't just dump it off somewhere, right? It's not a tracker he can take out of his body. And so Bastion says they stop moving for the night. My dear Reverend, take your squad of purifiers and crush them in their sleep. Be prepared for the X-Men to find you. Oversee the completion of the mission and take no prisoners. Now, this is an insane moment, because something that I want you to know is that Cable and Hope get to a hotel to crash for the night. They're in this hotel room for no less than 30 minutes, and they're immediately set upon by William Stryker and the Purifiers. Now, again, these guys are nuts, so the Purifiers will kill whoever they have to. It doesn't matter, right? Bystanders, right? Collateral damage, it's completely and totally irrelevant. All that matters is destroying mutants, and any humans who die along the way, well, that's just the cost of doing business. That's it. And so what you have is Cyclops, by way of Emma Frost, communicating with the X-Men and letting them know this is where they're located at. Now, one of the things to understand, they don't really have a tracking system. Instead, they're relying on a character by the name of Cypher, Douglas Ramsey. Doug Ramsey has the ability to basically speak any language that exists, but that includes alien languages, any kind of human language, but also like computer code. So literally this guy can just sit in front of a computer the same way that any of the characters sat in front of a monitor in the Matrix and just watch all these lines of code and see exactly what's being said. And that's why he's been able to detect where it is that Cable and Hope Summers are at, just by like camera footage and different things along those lines. And so once the X-Men respawn, as you guys can tell, they're always just a hair behind. They're never there before anybody else is. And so the Purifiers launch their attack and just start massacring everyone and everything that they can see. Now in turn, you also get the X-Men who arrive on the scene with X-Force, and they start attacking as well. And so what you end up getting in this hotel parking lot is just this absolute chaotic battle between the X-Men alongside Cable and Hope Summers against like a combination of the Purifiers and the Sapien League, right? Just dozens of people all fighting each other in what is in effect a fight to the death. And in fact, you get these amazing moments because what happens is the purifiers realize teleporters are on the scene, right? So start taking the teleporters out. They do this very, very strategically, right? Just because of the fact that the purifiers have been around for so long, and because there's so much information out there on the X-Men and what they're capable of doing, they know exactly who needs to be taken out at which point in time. The first thing you do here, take out the mutants that can guarantee an easy exit, those who fly and those who teleport. Once those guys are basically done, then you start targeting everybody else. You go for the heavy hitters, Colossus, those guys with super strength, so on and so forth. And then when all that's left are just the varying people who were there, it's easy pickings. Now for magic, Illyana Rasputin, the sister of Colossus, she's a magic wielder, right? She's not as strong as Doctor Strange, but she's pretty darn close, right? What ends up happening is there's a point when she is tasked with getting to Hope Summers and getting Hope Summers out as fast as possible. It's a moment of distraction. The vehicle they're standing behind is blown to pieces, and magic is basically pulled into a limbo portal. She's whisked out of this moment, right? Colossus is largely focused on her, but that leaves the rest of X-Force to focus on everybody else. They even take out Nightcrawler. They don't kill him or anything like that, but momentarily incapacitate him. The issue is that once Colossus sees that his sister's gone, and he doesn't know if it was an action by way of the Purifiers or something else, he assumes it's the Purifiers. So what these guys are now facing up against is this 6 foot and some change lumbering bear of a man with osmium metal skin that might as well be indestructible, barreling towards them, mad as hell. And it's like the worst possible thing they could deal with. And so that's why like he starts taking purifiers out left and right? And then William Stryker's just like, we need backup, right? As soon as we possibly can. Now this leads Cable grabbing Hope, throwing her in a Jeep and taking off. But Hope asks the question here, right? She says, we're just gonna leave them. The response of Nathan, they're not safe. Something is wrong here. Something's off. And so what you get is this moment where Wolverine looks at Archangel Warren Worthington and he says, Warren, we need to end this fast, because Warren is part of X-Force, right? And he asks the question, how fast? Wolverine just gives him the look, and in turn, Archangel says, tell everybody to stay low. This guy comes running in, using his wings, fires off his metal feathers, takes out all the purifiers in one fell swoop. Then he turns his attention to Cameron Hodge and kills this guy on the spot, literally cuts his head off using his wings. And in turn, like, Nightcrawler's just like, what is going on? Like, why are we killing people? This cannot be an okay thing. But Wolverine does exactly what he needs to do. He simply just tells Cyclops the purifiers are down. Cable's close, but we've lost our prime teleporter. The response of Cyclops? I know. Ariel is your new prime. Now, Ariel is not really a mutant. She's actually an alien, but the kicker about her power, it's really interesting and really unique at the same time. She's not like Nightcrawler where she can just jump around to different locations. The only way in which she teleports is to pass through an open door, but the door on the other side has to be open. So if she walks through the closet in her house and then she wanted to walk through the closet in yours, if the door's closed, she can't access it. It's a really interesting and wonky power, but in turn, following this, you pick up with Cable. Now, of course, the cool thing about this is you get a kind of conversation between Cable and Hope, and one of the things that this establishes is one of the most important elements of his character, that despite coming from the future and having advanced technology, Cable is not all-knowing, and that's one of those MacGuffins that kind of gets played with by Marvel Comics. A good example of this is during Civil War, when Cable shows up during Civil War and the Cable and Deadpool tie-in, and he's like, Mr. President, you shouldn't do this. I'm from the future. I know how this plays out. Yada, yada, yada. But then you get stories like this that actually make his character a lot more interesting, where he says, like, we were not in that room for 30 minutes. Whatever trail we left behind should have been hard enough for Cyclops to find. There's no way Bastion picked it up that fast. They've got to be tracking us somehow. And the return of Hope is, but we were looking for the X-Men. They found us. In turn, Cable says, Bastion found us first. Unacceptable. He could have a man on the inside. Which is a true statement, right? The X-Men only found them because Bastion found them. Well, technically, the X-Men found them because of Cypher, but also because there was a huge contingent of Bastion's forces converging on a singular location, right? 1 + 1 = 2. And so in turn, Cable says, 30 minutes, I'm not seeing something. We've got to go completely dark. We do not come up for air. no more hotels. We do not appear to anybody. Now, another really interesting element of this story, and it was something that at least up to this point in the story hadn't been fully explained, is the character of Rogue. And the reason why is because what she does is she starts to realize that she can effectively locate where it is that Hope Summer's at. And so what she does is she speaks with Cyclops and says, I can't explain it. I don't know why, but for some reason, I know exactly where they are. At every point in time, I can locate them no matter where they are in the world. The response to Cyclops, you're the new person on the team. He immediately sends her out into the field and he says, rendezvous with X-Force and the X-Men. You guys are gonna locate Hope Summers. Now, following this, Bastion initiates a contingency plan, and it is this just genius stroke of movement that he was doing while he was working against the X-Men. And as you guys are noticing, he's kind of cutting off all their different access points, all the ways in which they could locate Cable and Hope. They're being cut off. In effect, he's forcing the X-Men into a position where they're flying blind. Because what happens is that while Rogue is being teleported by Nightcrawler to where it is that Cable and Hope are at, that you end up having this just kind of like massive psychic feedback from Emma Frost that hits everybody at the same time. Now, this is a really interesting maneuver. This is something in particular that I want you guys to think about, because in X-Men 97, this could easily explain why it is that all the telepaths had this psychic feedback hit at one time, potentially including Charles Xavier. Not an absolute, but it is an interesting thing. What Bastion had done here is he sabotaged Cerebro. As most of you guys know, Cerebro is the device created by Professor Xavier that can be used by any telepath so long as their powers are sufficient enough to scan the world for any mutants that are out there. If Cerebro's destroyed, then there is no way to technologically track Cable and Hope, assuming that avenue even opened up. It's just shutting off one more possibility. But because of the fact that Cerebro was destroyed, this telepathic feedback just hits every telepath at once. And while it's not enough to kill them, they bleed from the nose, that it's just kind of one of those things where it's like, okay, something massive has hit us. The other part of this is Bastion is asked, the X-Men can no longer track their own people. You've dropped a hood over Scott Summers' head and tied it tight, while our own Cerebro tech is functioning as well as ever. But Bastion says, no, better than ever. Without the slight deform in the scanning field, I see their soldiers that much clearer. They've called in reinforcements, which was exactly the right thing to do. In fact, I was absolutely relying on it. Because what happens is that as these X-Men reinforcements are being called in, you have literally two vehicles, right? Two Hummers that are being driven by the X-Men. I mean, they're off-roading, driving through like oil rig things and all that kind of stuff. I have no idea what they're called, oil fields, right? You know, they're driving through all that stuff. Warren Worthington's flying over them, but then like what happens is Psylocke chimes in and says something's wrong. There's a force moving toward us incredibly fast. And that's when you realize it really is just kind of a ship. But what happens is this thing fires off a missile and it hits one of the cars, right? One of the vehicles, blows the thing to pieces. Now, of course, Warren Worthington tears it in half, right? Like destroys this thing on the spot. But what happens is Ariel, the main teleporter they had, she's killed. Right, she's dead. And in turn, Wolverine's just like, there's time for morning later. We do not have time for this right now. And they continue on the mission. Now, following that, there's this really, God, this is a really amazing moment. Like, we're so close to the end. It's amazing. Following that, what you do is you pick up in what was basically the Three Creeks trailer park, right? Just somewhere out in the middle of nowhere in Nebraska. Cable and Hope Summers are lying low, and you have the Sapien League that shows up on them yet again, right? Going to attack. Now, the X-Men, of course, arrive here just in time to basically take the Sapien League out. But what you end up getting is a conversation between the X-Men and Cable. And what happens is they basically spill the beans on what Cable didn't know. Then Nightcrawler tells him Wolverine wishes to speak with you outside. Now in turn, Wolverine says, it's not like you to leave yourself without an exit, old man. Of course, Cable says, I had 7 exits and we're about to take number 6. Wolverine in turn responds and he says, something you should know first. Intel we just got from Scott, this garbage keeps piling up for a reason. The entire computer grid is riddled with the techno-organic virus, just like you, and like calls to like. They can pinpoint you close enough to count the hairs on your chin. So, you got a plan B, Nathan? His response, of course I do. And his plan B is to hand Hope Summers over to the X-Men. Because if Hope Summers is handed over to the X-Men and Bastion and his forces are tracking the techno-organic virus in Cable, they won't know that Hope isn't with him. And while they are more than willing to kill Cable, their main target is Hope Summers. But the X-Men realize we can't just take her in a, ship or whatever it is back with us. We're easy pickings, right? We're like giant purple letters over our head that say, Hope Summers is here, Bastion, come and shoot her. And so they come up with this idea that what they're gonna do is they're gonna have Nightcrawler take Rogue and Hope Summers. Rogue's gonna offer some measure of protection. Nightcrawler is the transport, and they're just gonna kind of teleport from one place to the next, kind of bouncing around in a very untrackable way, and then in turn arrive back at Utopia. Because despite how much gumption Bastion has to launch an attack by uniting all the basically anti-mutant groups that exist out there, even he's not dumb enough to launch a singular attack against Utopia. Or is he? So what you do is you pick up with Bastion, who starts to realize what's going on. By tracking everything, he says Cable is now traveling with a contingent of X-Men. And where the question's asked, how do you know that? It's just kind of cutting themselves off and saying, never mind, I've got Mutant Response Division soldiers in the area, they can intercept in 5 minutes. But where Bastion doesn't respond, Bastion simply just says, processing, right? And he tells Stephen Lang, we will require transport. And so what you get here is this crazy moment where Cable is fighting alongside the X-Men as they're facing off against the various forces of like Stephen Lang and whatever other guys are working alongside his soldiers. But then you switch over to Hope Summers and to Rogue and to Nightcrawler. Now, one of the cool things to know about Nightcrawler is that there are limitations to how far he can teleport and how often he can teleport, that it does exhaust him and it does wear him out. And that's even what's kind of acknowledged here, is it's like, Nightcrawler, you're exhausted, right? You can't keep teleporting like this. Let me take some of your powers, right? That's what Rogue says. I can help. The response of Nightcrawler is, no. Do not do that. We will need you potentially for some kind of a fight. And in turn, Bastion appears on the scene. The dude just shows up out of nowhere. And this guy looks amazing. He just looks so dope. And in turn, it's just like, we've got trouble, right? He says, begin threat assessment. And he just starts going through all these different characters. He analyzes Hope Summers, says primary target, powers unknown, threat level unknown. He analyzes Rogue, multiple powers detected, threat level severe. He analyzes Nightcrawler, target code name, Nightcrawler, mutant, threat level medium. He's a flight risk, right? He's the guy capable of getting them out. Now Rogue immediately responds and goes to attack. Nightcrawler jumps in the way and he's able to block the shot, not enough to really kill him or anything, but it does offer Rogue the ability to tap into powers and to in turn punch a hole through Bastion. One of the things that I do want to point out is that at this point in time, Marvel was experimenting with the idea that Rogue could actually possess more than one power. It was pretty dope. Marvel basically rectified it all with this whole thing called the Hecatomb, which we don't need to get into here, but it was a really cool era for Rogue when she could use multiple powers. The problem is that it made it too easy. It made it too easy for her character, right? If she could just like pull powers out like a Rolodex, then she was basically this unstoppable, nearly godlike character. Of course, she's not here because it shows how advanced Bastion is. That Bastion basically hits this chick, that while she seemingly gets the upper hand on Bastion, he in turn basically overtakes her with all of his power, just kind of letting off this massive blast of energy. It's enough to knock her unconscious. And so in turn he says, relocating primary target, resuming termination, and she just like cracks Bastion over the head with a stick, right? Bastion's just like, no. Right? Like, that's not going to happen. Now, Nightcrawler, completely and totally exhausted, like, he's watching this whole thing happen, and Bastion tells Hope Summers, we have seen what you become, what the world comes because of you, and we cannot allow you to live. Literally, he's talking about the potential future where because Hope Summers becomes a host for the Phoenix, at least ideally, in Avengers vs. X-Men, which she does at the end, that there is a potential future where she wipes out like 1 million humans like that. It happens so fast, and it basically ends up leading to something akin to Days of Future Past. But that's Bastion's whole thing. We cannot allow you to live. You end up massacring so many humans. You are a threat to the human race. You must be destroyed. And so in turn, when this happens, Nightcrawler's eyes fire up, right? In turn, Bastion's just like, warning, mutant powers in use, calculating countermeasure. This guy goes to punch a hole through Hope Summers, Nightcrawler teleports right in front of it, and Nightcrawler gets punched in the chest. Nightcrawler sacrifices his life to save Hope Summers. With that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this video to an end. Massive cliffhanger. Thank you all for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.